All right, well, Ecclesiastes chapter 1, that's where we're going to be today. And I want to let you in on a little secret that I think I may have told you guys before. But there's this concept that I've learned from other people in ministry, and it's that nobody cares about the church more than the pastor. And in some ways, I understand that that will always be true, no matter what church you're in, no matter how engaged and in love with the church the members are. There's a certain calling and a certain passion that God gives to pastors that nobody else has. Like, I understand that. However, I don't think that if I say, like, I love Capernaum Baptist Church 10 out of 10, I don't think that everybody else in the church has to be less than 10. Like, I don't think that that's true. And I think if you look at the Bible, like, you see Paul, and he talks about the people who were addicted to the ministry. They addicted themselves to the ministry. It wasn't that Paul loved church more than them and he was more addicted. It wasn't like that. It's like other people are allowed to have buy-in. Other people are allowed to love church. Other people are allowed to love this ministry. And to say that that has to be true, I think is so out of touch, because it means that no one can ever be spiritually secure enough. No one can ever love Jesus enough. And no one can ever measure up compared to the pastor of a church. And that's such a haughty and such a false statement, because I know that you guys love our church. I know that there's a passion and a desire for this town to grow in their spiritual walks with Christ. And I know that that's because God put that there the same way he has for me. And honestly, more importantly, it puts a limit on God and on his spirit to lead people in their passion and in their desire to change the world for the kingdom. And that is not true. But all of it comes down to whether you love the church, whether you love God, whether you are in love with Jesus passionately and devoted to him. All of that comes down to one question, and you hit on this earlier, Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, do all as unto the Lord. No matter what you're doing, no matter where you are, no matter whom you're talking to, no matter what you're talking about, do everything that you do as unto the Lord. And that is why your life has purpose. Now, what does that have to do with Ecclesiastes, and why did I talk about the church and this thing that I've been told? Because people don't find their purpose in what matters. They find their purpose in their life, in their pursuits. They find their purpose in their wealth. They find their purpose in their job, in their satisfaction with their job, in their family, in their friends, in their relationships. They find their pursuit of hedonism their purpose. Their pursuit of just anything that I like, I want. Anything that makes me feel good, I desire. That's what they find their purpose in. And they live their lives aimlessly searching for thing after thing after thing that gives them purpose, but that's not why they have purpose. Their purpose will never come from what they do. It will never come from what your life gets. It will never come from how successful you become or how happy you become in a moment. That is not purpose. That's an emotion that you're feeling. And people who pursue that find joy in the pursuit. And I'm not lying. You can be 100% unsaved and still have a meaningful life, subjectively. Meaning you can die at the end of your life and think, yeah, my life was pretty good. Case in point, all the people who die and they aren't regretting the life decisions that they made. They're not on their deathbed thinking there must have been something more. Maybe Jesus was the way. Plenty of people have died and never thought that. Because they find purpose. But does that purpose actually matter? And the answer is very clear, no. And there's not a single person who's more qualified to speak to that than the man who had everything. Than the man who could buy anything, who could experience anything, who could marry anything, who could want anything, who could cause anything to happen. There's not a single person in the entire history of the world who's ever had as much as he's had, who's ever been as wise as he had, and that man is Solomon. Now, in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, we're going to find a lot of the introduction to this book. And we're going to learn a lot about the book of Ecclesiastes. And I really want to dive into two topics today where I'm going to give you an intro to the book. And then we're going to dive into chapter 1 and look at the content for what today has. Now, if you don't mind hitting that little transition thing, and it's going to do a cool little thingy. And then here we are. Now I can stand in the middle where I like. So Ecclesiastes, we're going to deal with the intro to the book. And before we do that, I just need you to understand the Bible still speaks. The Bible still speaks. And if Ecclesiastes is part of the Bible, then Ecclesiastes still speaks. Now, as you read through it, you're going to read a lot of Old Testament theory, a lot of old time conversations. You're going to learn about scientific principles that at the time they didn't understand, but now today we do. But that's not the point of Ecclesiastes. It's not to break down the words that he's saying, it's to find the principles that still apply. And if the Bible still speaks and Ecclesiastes is part of the Bible, then Ecclesiastes still has a message for us today, and it still has truth for us no matter where you are. I'm glad that God knew that whenever he wrote the Bible, and that he has even somewhat downer passages for us to read. This is going to definitely be one of those, and we're going to read it in a little bit. Now let's dive into the intro to the book. Number one, you got to understand the whole book tells a very sad story about the man who had everything and still lost. It's a man who used all of the wisdom and all of the wealth that he had. And you remember the story of Solomon, that God came to him one night and visited him and said, listen, you can have whatever you want. And he could have chose wealth. He could have chose success. But he chose instead wisdom to rule the nation that God had, which was a wise choice in and of itself. God said, you're going to be the wisest man ever to live on the earth. And from that point forward, he never had a bout of being unwise. Unless, of course, you consider his own personal life, in which case that was shambles. But in his ruling of the kingdom, he absolutely was wise, and he made good decisions. Financially, he had the wealthiest kingdom. He, of course, became the wealthiest person of all time because God said, you're going to be that. Because you could have chosen that, and you still chose to rule over the things that I've given you well. And so he made him wealthy. And because of that, he could have had anything that he wanted. In fact, he says later on in this book, he says, if I saw it and I wanted it, I took it. If I heard it and it sounded good, I listened more. Didn't matter what I wanted, I had anything. And so if anyone's qualified to speak to the fact that personal possessions, human life, can be satisfactory, but it's not purposeful, this is the man who's qualified to say that. Now, it revolves this whole book around a few themes, and several of these themes, not all of them, but several of them are going to be introduced later on as we read chapter 1. But let me give you a little overview. You're going to see a big play on wisdom versus foolishness. You're going to see work and play. You're going to see a contrast between life and death. Then you're also going to see time and effort. And finally, you're going to see sorrow and enjoyment. All of these speak to the existence that all humans have. And if you've lived at any point in your life, you've had moments where you've been enjoying life, where you've had sorrow, where you put time into something, but it doesn't matter, your effort was still wasted. It doesn't matter, all of us still have these same experiences, and that's why Ecclesiastes still speaks to us today, because it speaks to the human experience, not just Solomon's. Now, I'll tell you, if you're trying to figure out this outline of the book, I read every chapter of this. I've outlined every chapter of this multiple times. I have searched, I have Googled, I have read, I have used ChatGPT. Listen, I've gone to all lengths that I can to figure out a logical outline of this book, and there is not one. It's broken up. It's like whenever you're talking to somebody with ADD and you go from one thing and you return back and you come back and back and forth. That's what this book is like. And so even though there's recurring themes, even though there is some semblance of order, absolutely, and even though each chapter seems to have its own topic that it deals with, it's still not going to flow from one thought directly to the next. It's not like reading what Paul writes. Okay, Paul is like here to here, and because of that, this, and so on. This is not that. It is poetry, which adds to the feeling. And on top of that, it's a sermon, which just, you already know, sermons sometimes can go off the rails. So that's what Ecclesiastes is going to hold for us. So as we go through, I was trying to figure out, how can I turn this into like a 6-week study, maybe cover 1 or 2 chapters each week, and then really just blow through the big topics. And I realized that doesn't exist. You can't just chop this book up into 6 little dices and throw it out there and hope that you land on something cohesive. We're going to have to go through this step by step. And I think that's a valuable thing because that's how the Bible was written, line upon line, and that's how Jesus teaches, line upon line, and that's what Isaiah teaches us to do as pastors and as teachers, line upon line. So we're going to read line after line after line. We're going to understand the Bible for what it is and for how it was written. We're going to see to whom it was written. Then we're going to see why it was written to those people the way it was. And then we're going to see the principles from that still apply to us today, because the Bible still speaks. Now, I can remember when I was a kid going camping pretty much every summer. And I remember the very first time that I ever went camping with Dad. We went to this, I think it was called Camp of the Pines, and we had a church member who had a trailer park, and there's like this, at the very top of the park, there was this little campground for like actual tenting. And I remember that we had these like, it's a little pan, and it's a tinfoil pan, maybe you guys have had it. And they put popcorn inside, and you pull the top off, and then it pops popcorn over the fire. And I remember that. I also remember Dan grabbed a stick, and he lit the end of the stick on fire, and he started waving it around because it had like a little smoke trail. And then he got too close to the tent, and he burned holes in the tent. So that was fun. That's like the first time I ever remember camping. He still does it, yeah. And then I remember one of my other favorite campfire memories was seeing these little cinders still burn, even though there was an absolute storm outside. And in the flashes of lightning, we could see on the left side of our car this little tiny tube tent flying away in the wind, hoping that nobody was inside. And then lightning happens as Mom is saying, "I'm glad our tent's bigger than that." And we look over to the right, and our tent is bigger than that. It also was thrown up in the wind into a tree. And I remember seeing the little embers just kind of barely lighting up the bottom of the tent as it stuck 10 feet in a pine tree. All of this, though, campfires always put off smoke. And if you've ever been camping or around something, you know, like it doesn't matter where you go, you can never avoid the smoke. The wind always changes. It always hits you. You never know where that smoke's going to end up. And just think about it for a second. Do you know where the smoke goes? Like up, but then where? And even like the big plants and stuff, when they have the big chimney stacks, it smokes up into the sky, and then it forms this cloud. But where does the cloud go? I don't know. You can't track a piece of smoke because it's mysterious. It flows. And it appears like a thread of something that you could grab onto, something that you could touch. But whenever you touch it, it disappears. It's mysterious. It moves in its own patterns. No two smokes are alike. And it disappears into nothingness. And the Hebrew word to describe that smoke is called hevel. Hevel, hevel. And that word hevel describes something that is mysterious, something that is enigmatic, something that's not to be understood. It's a vapor, it's smoke, it disappears, it's a paradox. And that is the word that we see in our Bible translated vanity. Vanity. Now, vanity isn't the kind of vanity like I go and I pull the mirror down and then I do my makeup in the mirror. That's not the vanity I'm talking about. It's not vanity even where you care about your appearances, and so you're vain in your haughtiness, you're vain in your pride, you care about how you look. It's vanity in the sense that you will never truly understand it. So trying to understand something, it's just vain, it's empty, it's purposeless, it's meaningless because you're not going to get it. It's like, to a lot of people, advanced algebra is just hevel. It's just vanity. It doesn't make sense. They're never going to grab it. To the other half of humans, English rules just don't make sense. What's a participle? And then you add in, what's a past participle? I have no idea. A gerund, a gerund. Any of those things, it's vanity. Some people just don't get it. It's hevel. It disappears. And the second they feel like they finally got a grasp on what it actually is, it just disappears like smoke, and they open their hand to find out. Just like every time I try to swat at a fly, it's not there. That's the same thing. That's hevel. It's vanity. And that's going to be used 38 times throughout this book. Vanity. Vanity. All is vanity. Everything is a mystery. Everything is completely unknowable. Now, there's two other phrases that are very important for us to recognize. One is illustrative and the other is conditional. Now, in illustrative, it's going to paint a picture. And here's the picture. You're going to find it 7 times throughout this book. It's the phrase chasing the wind. Chasing the wind. It's like when you go out and you know where the wind might be coming from because you feel where it's blowing across your body. But you don't know where it's going to go. And even this morning we were talking about it. We both looked at the weather app. Of course, you have like the fancy radar one. I looked at my basic The Weather Channel app, and I saw that the wind was blowing a storm over Hammond all day today. The entire time that we were supposed to be here, we weren't going to be able to set up. We weren't going to be able to carry anything out because the wind was blowing it. But where is the storm? It's not above us because the wind doesn't follow our commands. We don't know where it came from. We know it might be from the south or from the east, but we don't know where it came from before it was in the east. We don't know where it's going to go. Where is that piece of wind going to travel? Nobody knows. And that's the same way with a lot of things in life. We're going to try to understand it. We're going to try to think through it. But we never really get to the end of the thought because it's hevel. It's chasing the wind. It's purposeless. It's vanity. That's the illustration that Solomon's going to use many times. But 29 times, he's going to use a conditional phrase, meaning everything that we've talked about so far is only hevel if it is under the sun. Under the sun. We've talked about this before. Under the sun means anything that is below the sun. Okay, we know that word. That refers to real life. But what is above the sun? The heavens. Who lives in the heavens? God does. So if you look at life and you see that this thing, I could go out and I could make money and provide for my family, but it's hevel. Why don't I just dumpster dive for food with my kids? That's hevel too. It's purposeless. It's vanity. Why do I care how I look? We're all going to die anyway. Why do I work a job that I don't enjoy? We're just going to make money and then shove it back to the pile for everyone else to live with. It's all hevel. If you're only under the sun. And when we change our perspective from the day-to-day life, and we look beyond the sun and we see there's a God who has purpose. There's a master organizer. There's someone at work behind the scenes who is better at understanding things than I am. Now hevel transforms to purpose. And when we come in week after week and we love our church and we pray for our church, we care for one another and we think about one another throughout the week, and we come in and we set up and we leave and we tear down, when all of it just seems like hevel sometimes. When your Bible study doesn't make sense every single time you open it. When it feels like you're studying or you're praying and there's no one on the other side. On earth, under the sun, sure. It's vanity. It's emptiness. God, are you even up there? It's hevel. But when we look beyond the sun, we find purpose. Now let's read the first chapter. We're going to go verse 1 all the way through the end at verse 18. And you're going to find as we go through this, you're going to see kind of the introduction and the author. You're going to see an opening poem. And in this poem, he's going to introduce some themes and concepts. That's verses 3 through 11, which, by the way, super powerful little hack that I have whenever I'm studying the Bible is look for the paragraph divisions. If you're not seeing paragraph divisions, then either get a different app that has them or get a different rendition of the Bible, different version or a different version of that version. For instance, King James has there's the King James, but there's also the Schofield King James, and that has little paragraph markers. This one, the MEV that I use, has actual paragraphs split up in the Bible, and I think you have that one too. So as you read through, look for the paragraphs, and you're going to see in the paragraph from verses 3 through 11, there's a poem. And you're going to see that introduces a lot of the themes that we're going to revisit throughout the rest of the book, or the sermon, since it's the book of Ecclesiastes, which just means the preacher or the teacher. Number 3 in this chapter, we're going to see that he establishes his authority to speak on this. And the way he does this is he's going to overview all of his experiences. He's going to say, this is what I did. Here's how I lived. Here's how I experienced hevel for myself. And now I'm qualified more than anyone else in the world because I've done more than anyone else in the world. I know it all. I've done it all. I've seen it all. Here's why I'm qualified to tell you. It's all Hebel. And then he's going to say, as I was living those things, here's what I was thinking, and here was my purpose. Here are my inner thoughts. And then he's going to say, and all of those inner thoughts added up to what we're going to see in verse 18, his conclusion, and he's going to show us the finding that he has from living under the sun. Okay, let's read through. Verse 1, these are the words of the preacher. Now, who is the preacher? Well, we know that he's the son of David and king in Jerusalem. Now, does that mean it was Solomon? Not necessarily, although everything else in the rest of this book seems to be from Solomon. It's written the same way that he writes. It's taught the same way that he teaches. It's explained the same way that he would explain things. And so Solomon is the presumed author of the book of Ecclesiastes, and there's a lot of proof for that. Now, we don't have to get into why, but just for the rest of our study, assume that whenever I say Solomon, we're talking about the teacher, the preacher. Now, he says this. He labels himself in verse 1 as the words of the preacher. And there's some debate on which term we should use. Is it the preacher or the teacher? Well, either way, what he's doing is he's coming alongside you, and he's not addressing you. So like right now, I'm preaching to you, I'm addressing you. The way that he approaches this book is he comes alongside you and says, listen, I've done all the things. Let me tell you why you just probably shouldn't do these things. It's kind of like somebody who's maybe been addicted to drugs, and they are qualified now to go to a school and say, listen, this is what my life turned into. Don't be like me. That's kind of how Ecclesiastes is written. He's going to preach a sermon not from an idea that he's had, which, have we ever heard sermons that maybe aren't based on the Bible, but based on an idea that someone's had? Yeah. Sometimes we hear sermons that are based on a personal interpretation or a preference. That's not what Solomon's talking about. No, he's going to preach from a place of conviction. And Warren Wiersbe said, preach from the overflow. Meaning, let God fill you up so much in your heart that what spills out over top is the few things that you can finally say to somebody else. And if you ever end up teaching the Bible, if you ever have kids and you want to teach them the Bible, don't teach them things that you heard from someone else. It's really hard to disciple somebody if you're only discipling them from the passion that you've learned from someone else. You can't take someone else's qualification, maturity, passion, desire, and translate that to someone else without having it yourself. And look at Titus and Timothy. Could they be good preachers for any more than just a year had they only preached what they learned from Paul himself? Or do they have to study to show themselves approved? Do they have to be the ones in the Bible? Which, by the way, for us, if we are going to have a life with purpose, we have to speak out of conviction. Because the Bible is personal to us. It speaks to you where you are. The Bible still speaks. Now look at verse 2. This is the beginning of his message to the world. He says, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What an encouragement. Verse 3. This is the beginning of his opening poem. What benefit is there to a man in all his labors that he toils, and here's our phrase, under the sun? So why does anyone want to work when all of his labor is under the sun? Rhetorical question. Verse 4. A generation comes, and a generation goes, but the earth continually remains. Look over at that mountain. You see it? This nation rose and fell when that mountain was in place. These people lived and died when that mountain was in place. The earth still remains even when people come and go. So what you do does not have any earthly consequences. Under the sun, it does not matter. Verse 5. The sun comes up, the sun comes down, and hurries to the place where it rises. It moves to the south and then moves around to the north. The wind continually travels around and keeps turning on its circuit. Verse 7, all the streams flow into the sea, and the sea is never filled up. And to the place where the streams flow, there they continually return to flow. All matters are wearisome. A man is not able to speak to them. Have you ever tried to solve a complex problem, and you've thought about it and thought about it and thought about it, and you finally come up to a solution and then realize there's actually a hole in that solution too, and now you got to think about it and think about it and think about it. Everything's wearisome. Everything gets tiring. At some point, you don't have enough brain power because you're not smart enough and you're going to get tired. Even good things that we do, planning for a birthday party, it still takes work to set up the birthday party. Still got to clean up all the cake that the kids spilled at the birthday party. It's a good thing, and it's still tiring. Everything that we do as humans are wearisome. In verse 8, the second half, it says, the eye is not satisfied with what it sees. Why do we want to keep watching movies? Who else watches Home Alone every Christmas? Me? Yes. Okay. Oh, not you? You're not a Home Aloner? Oh. Okay. Well, the eye's not satisfied. We've seen it. We know the plot. We know what happens. We laugh at all the same jokes. The guy always slips on the same spot. He steps on the same ornaments through the window. Same plot. The movie didn't change, but we are not satisfied. It's still funny when Kevin runs into Buzz and he shoots pizza out of his face, not his face. The eye's not satisfied. We keep watching. We keep listening to the same things. It says, and the ear is not content with what it hears. Verse 9, what has been is the same as what will be. And what has been done is the same as what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. And there's our phrase again. Under the sun, nothing is being created. Nothing is changing. Governments rise and fall the exact same way. Look at Rome. The downfall of Rome. It was on every male's mind, apparently, for the last forever, according to that trend that went around. We can observe the same patterns throughout history. Nations rise up on these principles. They continue on these principles until eventually corruption happens, and then the nation falls. Today, we're in a nation that is divided very sharply, to the point where people are willing to kill other people or attempt. We're in a place that is no different than where we were in the 1800s when Abraham Lincoln was the president. We're in a place that's no different than where we were in the 1700s than when the king was causing the Stamp Act to happen. We're in a place that was no different from then than when Ireland and the whole UK had their war back in the day. We're in our place that's no different from back when Scotland tried to divide from the kingdom for crown and covenant. We don't live a different history. The names change, the places change, the weapons used change, but wars still happen. Leaders still rise and fall. There's always corruption. There's always deceit. Taxes are always collected, and yet the bill is never paid. Nations exist the same way that they always have, and that's just on a national scale. How much do we still eat the same foods? We all eat like the same 10 foods, basically. The same 10 meals over and over again. For me, Cane's, Chick-fil-A, I like pasta Alfredo, I like making those chicken skewers we talked about. Like, I can name your 10 foods right now. And if you change the 10 foods, you can get different results in the way that you look or in the way that you feel. But we all eat the same things. We all go to the same places. We're in the same building that we've been in. We're in the same town that we've been in. The town's been named the same thing as it has since the 1800s. We are not changing. Life doesn't change. And where we are is not going to be different than where we have been as a nation, as a people, as humans. Because there's nothing new under the sun. The good part is that everything we just said is only true if you're looking at the human experience, not at God's perspective. He says in verse 10, is there a matter where it said, see, this is truly new? Remember AI came out recently? But what is AI? It's just a model based on people and their thinking process. So even AI, which is truly new, is not actually that new. It's just a copy and paste of what we humans can already do naturally. There's nothing new under the sun. Even the newest of new things, inventions, the light bulb. Okay, so what? Electricity still existed. Filaments still burned and caused light whenever they were heated up. We have nothing new under the sun. Long ago in the past, it says the second half of that verse 10. Long ago in the past, every matter that has already been in our midst. Verse 11, there is not a memory for the former things, meaning we're not going to remember anything that's come before us. And moreover, or on top of that, there will not be memory for the things coming after, even those things which are yet to come. People are going to forget our names 100 years from now. You don't remember your great-great-great-grandkids or grandparents. You don't know their names. You don't know your heritage. People forget. And even the things that are still to come, people are still going to forget those things in the future. So why do we do anything? Isn't it just all hevel, all vanity? Look at verse 12. He's going to show you his qualification and the pursuit that he had, the reason why he's qualified to talk about this. He says, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem. I set my heart to seek and to investigate with wisdom everything that is done under heaven. It is a burdensome task that God has given to the sons of man by which they may be occupied. Now, on that, by the way, I think it's everybody's job. He says here, it's mankind's job to investigate what happens under the sky. And when we do, it doesn't matter if you're an atheist, if you're a Buddhist, if you're a Christian, if you're a Jew. It doesn't matter where you come from. At the end of the day, we all have the same observations. Under the sun, everything's still going to be hevel. Doesn't matter. You can ascribe purpose to it. You can say it's got reason. But at the end of the day, it all disappears along with you. So it doesn't matter. He says in verse 14, I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and indeed, all is vanity and like chasing the wind. There's our other phrase. What is bent cannot be straightened, and what is missing cannot be counted. And now in verse 16, he's going to show you the purpose with which he did all of this investigating, all of this living. He says, I spoke in my heart, saying, I have been great and increased in wisdom more than anyone else who has been before me in Jerusalem. And my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I set my heart, here's his purpose, I set my heart to know wisdom and to know the folly of ideas and to know foolish behavior. And I know that this as well is like chasing the wind. Meaning even when you're trying to figure out what's right and wrong, people still have their opinions on it, don't they? Is abortion right or wrong? Now, I think from the Bible we can say that it is wrong, but people still have opinions, and it's like chasing the wind to try to convince people otherwise. You can't talk to people who have different opinions because they don't change. It's like chasing the wind. If I say something's right, if I say something's valuable, if I say this is wise, that's foolish, who cares? I do, but that's it. And if I can't change the world, then why do you even try to change a little bit? Because life does have purpose. Only if you look beyond the sun. And look at verse 18. This is his finding. And this is what's going to set the stage for the rest of the book. For everything else that we deal with. For kingdoms, for business, for identity, for worship, for your family and the generations that come after you, for enjoyment, for everything else that follows. This is the thesis that we got to work from. For in an abundance of wisdom is an abundance of frustration. And he who increases in knowledge also increases in sorrow. Meaning, as long as you're looking at life from a human perspective, doesn't matter how wise you get, you're always going to be frustrated. Now, I don't know if you've ever watched somebody make a dumb decision. And you look at them and you think, what on earth are you thinking? And now you get frustrated, you get angry at them. You're like, please just stop. You're wiser than they are, and you're looking at their situation thinking, stop doing what you're doing. You get angry, you get frustrated. You know more than they do, and you just wish that you could give them that knowledge and that they can make the right choices. It's all frustrating. But it's not about your knowledge and about your wisdom, because that's not the purpose that we have. The purpose is to share God's wisdom and God's knowledge. Now, the point isn't to hate this life or to think that we don't have purpose here or that we should just stop trying to live for anything. That's not the point of this book. The point is to show that you should enjoy your life as under the sun. In fact, in several places, he's even going to say that. The most clear one is that the best thing that a man has to enjoy is to work really hard and to enjoy the fruits of that labor, to eat good food, to drink good drinks, to enjoy your life. Love your wife. Love your family. Have kids. Enjoy the physical life that you have. He says that several times in different ways throughout this book. So it's not that life is valueless. It's not that it's truly empty. It's that trying to understand it, shy of looking to God, is empty. Does that make sense? So don't get confused. Don't think that he hates life. That's not the point. Don't think that he hates doing things that are worth doing. That's not the point. The point is trying to understand everything from a human perspective is absolutely empty. It's absolutely foolish and worthless. Like chasing the wind, it's vanity, it's hevel, it's smoke. Now, honestly, this all comes back to glory in God. Because when we look at it from a human perspective, we're saying, this is what I think about it, this is what I believe about it, here's my perspective, and I still don't have all the answers, but you know who does? The one who's above the sun. And when we look to him and we say, God, I don't get this, but I know you do. Now our perspective is not on me. It's not on my understanding. It's not on we're trying to fit everything into a box and make everything have purpose. Now it's, God, I trust you. And I know that what you're doing right now, even though I don't get it, even though right now I feel like I'm just chasing wind and not making any progress, I know that you get it. So give my actions purpose. And as we journey through this book, you're going to come face to face with the actions that you're doing. And you're going to have to ask yourself questions all throughout, and you're going to have to come face to face with challenges. Not a challenge like a difficulty, but you are going to be challenged by this book. And you're going to have to think through two different layers. The first one is, am I? Am I living like Solomon under the sun? Am I trying to force meaning into everything? Don't we do that sometimes? Everything has to have meaning and I have to understand it. Are you doing that? Am I enjoying what I have or always trying to get more? Am I always seeking wisdom but never using what I have? The same could be said for knowledge. Am I living for pleasure? Am I seeking gratification? And most importantly, am I playing God? You're going to have to see those questions played out. You're going to see those examples illustrated through poetry. Stories told, illustrations given, and you're going to have to come face to face with these questions. Am I living under the sun? Or am I trying to live for beyond the sun? Only when you come to that conclusion yourself, only when the Bible has chewed you up and spit you out, only when God has struck you personally, can you go and do the same thing for someone else and teach them the same truths. Because here's the thing. Remember I told you can't disciple someone from someone else who came before you. Their maturity, their strength, their godliness cannot be translated from you passing it over yourself to someone else. No, you have to own that too. And when you teach from the overflow, that's when lives change. And you want to see your life has a purpose, then your purpose has to be to live for what's beyond the sun. And the way to do that is where we all started today. Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, do it as unto the Lord. That's your purpose.